Hello, I'm James Whitmore, and I'm privileged to present this very special program on one of the greatest adventures in American history. 200 years ago, a small group of men, along with one woman and her baby, spent 2.5 years exploring the uncharted continent at the behest of their president, Thomas Jefferson. They made the first inventory of the American West. They made a host of scientific discoveries. They met Indian tribes, wrote in journal form the first draft of a key chapter in American history, and experienced one of the world's great camping trips. They traveled up the Missouri River, crossed the Rocky Mountains, and made their way to the Pacific Ocean before returning home to share the news of what they'd found, news that would inspire hundreds of thousands of their fellow Americans to look westward into the future. This was a voyage of discipline, cooperation, goodwill, and even heroism. This was the voyage of discovery of Lewis and Clark. Of all the great explorations, this is the most accessible. At historical sites scattered over a dozen states, we can still see what they saw, camp where they camped. And of all the great explorers, Lewis and Clark give us the best description of what they encountered. They've been called the writingest explorers of all time. Following their trail with their journals in hand leaves us astonished at what they did and how they did it. Their expedition will forever stand as a monument to the vision and statesmanship of Thomas Jefferson, and a lesson in what can be accomplished when we act together as a team. Something families today can experience in their own way when they go traveling on the Lewis and Clark Trail.
You could have a country that ran from sea to shining sea. One country. Nobody had ever thought such a thing was possible before. Jefferson set out to make it happen. And it was more than just one country. It's an empire of liberty. He wanted to extend the American Constitution beyond the Mississippi River, over the Rocky Mountains, all the way to the Pacific.
Thomas Jefferson dreamed about the American West all his life. In his mind's eye, he saw woolly mammoths, the lost tribe of Israel, an endless landscape for his agrarian vision. But what he wanted was facts. On 3 previous occasions, he tried unsuccessfully to send a reconnaissance party into the interior. Now, his election to the presidency in 1800 allowed him to fulfill this long-standing dream. He chose his Virginia neighbor and friend, Meriwether Lewis, to lead the expedition. Lewis would in turn select his friend, William Clark, to be his co-captain. On the eve of the expedition, Jefferson announced that he had purchased the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon, doubling the size of the United States with a single stroke of his pen. This made the expedition even more important because overnight, what had begun as Jefferson's intellectual whim became instead a critical event in American destiny. Guiding us on our own exploration of the Lewis and Clark Trail will be humanities scholar Clay Jenkinson. Let's join him now at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia.
In the year 1800, rivers were the thoroughfares of America. Above their falls lay the heart of our national mystery. Most Americans still hug the Atlantic shore, but all of them wondered what lay beyond the Allegheny Ridge, and none more so than Thomas Jefferson. Hello, I'm Clay Jenkinson. Ever since I was a child growing up on the plains of North Dakota, I've had a fascination for Lewis and Clark and a special love affair with the Missouri River. I've had the opportunity to drive the entire Lewis and Clark Trail 3 or 4 times and hike whole swaths of it. By the time this program ends, I hope you will want to embark on your own voyage of discovery, stopping at historical markers along the way and reading the remarkable journals of Lewis and Clark at campsites overlooking the Missouri and Columbia rivers. Most people think the Lewis and Clark expedition began in St. Louis in 1804, but in fact it was born years earlier in the capacious mind of Thomas Jefferson. As a young man, he sat here at Harper's Ferry overlooking the confluence of the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers and wrote about time and geology and the formation of the American landscape. Jefferson was fortunate in his protégés, and one of them, Meriwether Lewis, would explore the interior of the continent on his behalf. It was here at Harper's Ferry that Lewis purchased much of the equipment for his journey. Before he could undertake his famous reconnaissance, Lewis had to outfit the expedition, recruit men, descend the Ohio River, and learn what he could of the Missouri country from the fur trappers, aristocrats, and politicians of St. Louis. Beneath the elegant 630-foot Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri, stands the Museum of Westward Expansion, where you can have a superb introduction to the world of Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, and the voyage of discovery. This is the logical place to begin following in the footsteps of Lewis and Clark. Once seen as a kind of grandiose camping trip, now the Lewis and Clark expedition is understood as a multicultural gathering of America's peoples, its energies, and its landscape. It was also the first American space race, just as the Russian launch of the satellite Sputnik in October 1957 spurred the United States to get serious about space exploration. So, the British explorer Alexander Mackenzie's 1793 expedition across the Canadian Rockies to the Pacific Ocean forced the American people to think about their own future in the West. The expedition was also a grand expression of the American Enlightenment. Lewis and Clark were instructed by Jefferson to conduct a scientific inventory of a whole continent, to see what animals and plants and peoples lived in the American interior, to establish friendly negotiations with Indian tribes and take down their vocabularies, to catalog and classify the resources of what Jefferson called an empire for liberty, such as the world has never previously seen.
Well, someone has called this our national epic of exploration. That is, that Lewis and Clark really set the tone for the westward movement of the country. And so most Americans look to this, and rightly so, because Lewis and Clark went with good aims. They went with the sort of ideas that Americans hold dear.
This is the staging point of the Lewis and Clark expedition as we usually think of it. I'm standing at Camp Wood on the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers about 17 miles north of St. Louis. It was here that the Corps of Discovery left the relatively well-known waters of the lower Mississippi and slipped into what Meriwether Lewis would call the mighty and heretofore deemed endless Missouri River. The date was May 14th, 1804.